Las Vegas has made some puzzling moves this offseason, be it moving from Derek Carr to Jimmy Garoppolo or signing a primarily slot wide receiver in Jacoby Myers when they already had Hunter Renfrow in the slot. This video will discuss just how good they've ended up being. And to start out, at quarterback, even though it's a bit odd to move from Derek Carr to Jimmy Garoppolo, I think they made an upgrade talent-wise. According to expected points added, which if you don't know what that stat means, I have a video breaking it down. Derek Carr was 23rd among 37 quarterbacks that took 200 or more snaps last season, and comparatively, Garoppolo was 5th out of all quarterbacks in that same stat. Does that mean that Garoppolo is the 5th best quarterback? Definitely not. That would be disingenuous to suggest that, but what it does mean is that Garoppolo can really get it done when he has elite talent around him. And the 49ers have better receivers and a better offensive line and also better coaching than the Raiders. But the thing is, the Raiders are elite in 2 out of those 3 categories as well. So I don't think it's outlandish to assume that Garoppolo can succeed with the Raiders as well, because the receiving play is about as good as anybody in Las Vegas, with Davante Adams being a clear-cut top 5 receiver, and the offensive line is also top 10 in pass protection. So he's going to have a lot of talent around him, and that's when he's at his best. When he doesn't have to do too much and he can just play within himself, he can really be successful. The only holdup I have with Jimmy Garoppolo in Las Vegas is that Davante Adams is an elite deep downfield receiver, as he was 28th in average depth of target among all receiving players, so tight ends included. And Jimmy Garoppolo is not a deep downfield passer by any stretch, as he was 32nd out of 40 quarterbacks in average depth of target as well. So he was about dead last, and Adams is elite in that regard. So I don't have fears for the offense as a whole, because I do think the overarching talent is meant for shallow passing, which Garoppolo is great at. But I do wonder if Adams is going to have a bit of a fall off, because he's not going to be able to win downfield as much, because Garoppolo is not going to be able to get him the ball downfield as much. Shifting to the offensive line, as I was alluding to before, PFF ranked them 9th in pass blocking, so they're elite in that regard, and they also ranked them 17th in run blocking, so they're pretty solid as a whole. And really, it starts with their tackles, because Colton Miller and Jermaine Illuminor are an absolute elite bunch for tackles. They're both great in pass protection, and they're both really good in run blocking. So that gives you a really solid foundation right there. Then the interior is not quite as strong as you would expect for them ranking as highly as they did, because Dylan Parham was not particularly good in pass protection last year. He ranked 64th out of 74 guards in that regard. He is a really solid run blocker, though. And Alex Bars, as well, is somebody that can pass protect at a replacement level, but is a really poor run blocker. So they do have some issues on the interior. Their center, Andre James, is solid in both pass protection and run blocking, so they have a mix of talent on the inside. It's just they're pretty much one or the other, and that they can either run block or pass protect. So there are some weaknesses on this line, but as a whole, this is one of the better lines you're going to see in the NFL. As far as their weapons go, you obviously have Davante Adams, who, as I said, is a top 5 receiver. If you needed proof of that, he was 5th in yards per game and 9th in yards per reception. So just an absolute elite receiver. After him, it gets a little messy because Hunter Renfrow had 1,000 yards 2 years ago in 2021, so he can be really great when he's healthy. This past season, he was not healthy, so he did not have a very good year. Jacoby Myers as well. He was on pace for 976 yards this past season. He was also injured for a bit of the year, but it's just a little clunky because Renfrow and Myers both do much of their work in the slot, so they can't both be there at the same time. It's going to be interesting to see if Josh McDaniels can figure out how to utilize them effectively in the passing game, because when it comes to the short passing game, Josh McDaniels is about as good of a coordinator or coach as you'll see in the NFL. He was obviously the architect of the Patriots offense that was just so proficient in dinking and dunking their way down the field in the most infuriating of ways for years on end. And even though McDaniels doesn't have a great reputation as a head coach, I still believe that he is a good X's and O's guy and can maximize the talent out of his players. So I think that the fit is not ideal with their receivers, between Adams being kind of a deep threat and Garoppolo not being able to accommodate that. And then obviously having two slot receivers is a bit odd, but I think if anybody's going to be able to figure it out, it's Josh McDaniels, because he knows how to pass the ball very short. And that's what he's going to have with his quarterback and two of his receivers. And then Davante Adams is just so good that I'm not going to doubt his ability to do anything. Looking at their other weapons as well, they have Josh Jacobs, who is arguably the best running back in all of football last season, as he had 1,653 rushing yards, and he did so on 4.9 yards per carry, which, to go back to their offensive line, they are a solid run blocking unit. They're not the greatest, so a lot of that production is on Jacobs, which cannot be said for every running back, because most running backs are just a product of their environment, meaning they're sort of interchangeable because the offensive line is really what's doing the work. But in the case of Jacobs, he gave you elite production with okay run blocking, and that's really, really impressive. After him, they have Michael Mayer, the tight end, and he is an exciting player. He was considered by some to be a first-round talent out of Notre Dame this past draft, but he ultimately fell because I think the league is kind of going a little bit away from the true inline tight end that is great at run blocking and can receive in the short game. But the thing is, for the Raiders, they just need their tight end to block and catch short downfield. So it's a good fit, and I think the talent is there. I don't really hate the idea of Mayer as a first-round pick, which at tight end is kind of saying something, because historically tight ends take a while to develop, and they also just struggle mightily in their first year in particular. So saying that he's a first-round talent is really saying something. As far as their defense goes, it's a lot worse of a situation than their offense is. But to start out with their corners, Duke Shelley ranked as the fourth best corner according to PFF last season. So there is some potential there. He has not graded well in any of his 3 other years of play, and really has only played one other year, which was 2021, which he wasn't good in. So I wouldn't say that he's expected to be a slam dunk for them. Also, David Long Jr. is going to be their other outside corner. He has not been great in his career. He's had 4 years in the NFL and really only played in 2021 and wasn't particularly good in that year. What is a bit more hope-inducing, though, is Nate Hobbs had a great rookie year in 2021 as a slot corner, or a nickel corner, I should say. And that's what he's going to be playing more of again this year, because that's just where his skill set lies. He's a great run defender. He's super physical. He's a great slot corner, but he's not too good on the outside. And last year he was playing on the outside a good bit and really was not too productive. For their safeties, Trayvon Moehrig had a great rookie year in 2021 as well, and then also regressed in 2022. So it'll be interesting to see if he can rebound. And lastly, Marcus Epps. He really struggled this past year for Philly, but has had 2 good years in 2020 and 2021. So there is some hope for him as well. And overall, I wouldn't feel comfortable in saying that their defensive backs are going to be good, but they definitely have the potential to be solid this upcoming season. And speaking of being solid, they have a top 5 edge rusher in Max Crosby, who, according to Pro Football Reference, was second in pressures out of any player in the NFL last season. And what's really nice too is he's also great as a run defender, so he has no issue at any phase of the game. He can come after the quarterback at an elite level, and he can also defend the run about as well as anybody as an edge rusher. So he is a truly great player and is maybe a little bit underrated at this point, because I think a lot of people realize that he's good, but I think a lot of people don't understand just how good he is. After him, though, there's a pretty steep fall off because Chandler Jones is their next best player, and he is just not very good at this point. He ranked 58th in pressures, so he's an okay number 2, but he is not nearly as good as he was in years past. And then the interior is also really lacking. They have Blau Nichols, who is okay. He's not really great at this point. He never really was that good of a player, but he has fallen off pretty mightily in the past couple of years. He used to be at least a really solid player. Now he's sort of a replacement level player, I would say. He's a solid pass rusher, but he really struggles in the run game. And then they have the exciting rookie Tyree Wilson, who is 270 pounds and is a freak of nature. So he can be either an oversized edged or an undersized interior player. So it's going to be interesting to see how he does. He was regarded by some to be better than Will Anderson, which I personally didn't see, but I understand the mindset of a freak athlete that's about as athletic as any edge prospect has been in recent memory, and just trying to mold him into the player he could possibly be, because if he does refine his technique a fair amount, because he's not in the greatest spot right now, I wouldn't say he's too refined, but if he is able to refine his technique, he's going to be a really special player. So they do have some potential on the line. It's just really going to come down to if Tyree Wilson can be productive as a year 1 player or not, which I don't think he's going to be overly productive, but I do definitely see a world in which his athleticism does allow him to be a solid player. To round out their roster, their linebacking core is one of the most interesting in the NFL, because Divine Diablo was a safety in college and he converted to linebacker. So you would expect him to have some pretty good coverage skills, but in reality, he's pretty much just a run defender. And Robert Spillane is a safety size linebacker, as he's 230 pounds, but he's also a better run defender than he is a coverage guy. There is that famous play for Spillane where he's absolutely stonewalled Derrick Henry, which is not something I would expect him to do continually, but is just an interesting play because it does show that Spillane, even in his lightweight, can really be a great tackler and really just get after you in the run game, which is nice to see. That's especially important because, as I was saying before, their defensive line is a bit soft aside from Max Crosby, because I didn't mention this before, but Chandler Jones, he's an okay run defender. He's probably better in run defense than he is as a pass rusher at this point. So he's going to give you something of value in that regard. But really, the defensive line is a bit squishy, and the linebackers are going to help mitigate that issue because they both can just really thump in the run game. So they do have some value, but I would say overall, this is one of the most poor linebacking rooms in the entire NFL because neither of them can play in the coverage game, and really they're not good blitzers either. So they're just limited to being run defenders, and really if they're not kept clean, they're going to be problematic because, again, they're both about 230 pounds, so they're not going to be able to push off of blocks very well, and with their defensive line, they're not going to be kept clean too often. As far as coaching is concerned, I do think that Josh McDaniels is really on the hot seat at this point because he does have his quarterback, assuming Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be healthy this year. So there's not really going to be an excuse for the offense to not really click this year. They have a great offensive line, some really good playmakers, and the quarterback, he wants to run his system. So everything is in place for him to succeed. And in the past, we have seen McDaniels have success with his short passing game. So I do have some faith for him, but at this point, he is almost entirely unproven as a head coach. I wouldn't say that he's really shown anything of promise to this point. And that may sound harsh, but that's just the reality of it. He's had several years as a coach now, a head coach, and he just has not had much success. And really, he's kind of gotten what he's wanted at quarterback because he was the one pushed for Tebow in Denver as well, which was obviously a disaster. So it's going to be interesting to see if he can rebound and show that he's more than just a good offensive coordinator. He can also be a good head coach. Defensively, I'm a big fan of Patrick Graham. I think that he's one of the more underrated defensive coordinators in the NFL, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him get a head coaching opportunity in a few years because I think he's really good from the standpoint that he's multiple in his defenses, that he doesn't play just one certain way. He molds the defense based on the talent of the team. So he can play really conservative coverages, or he can play man coverages. He can blitz. He can also just rush four. He's a really solid coordinator, and I think he's really nice to have with the Raiders because the talent is very uncertain with them defensively aside from Max Crosby. So it's nice to be able to just say, we're going to play you to the best of your strengths. And with their players, they don't have the strongest strengths on the defensive side of the ball, but they do have some, and they're going to be maximized, in my opinion, under Patrick Graham. So just how good are the Raiders going to be this year? I think they're going to be just okay. And I definitely see a world in which they have a top 10 offense and can be really prolific then as a team. But there's a lot of uncertainty around them because Jimmy Garoppolo might not be healthy to start out the year. And really, he might not even make the team if he's unhealthy. They might cut him. I'm not too confident in that. I would say it's more likely than not that Garoppolo will play. It's just a question of how much he will. Then obviously with Josh McDaniels, still a question mark on if he's a good coach or not. Defensively, I would say Max Crosby and Trayvon Moehrig are pretty much the only two players I feel confident in. I think Nate Hobbs is also somebody I would feel pretty sound in, but that's about it. Marcus Epps, you could convince me, but he is coming off of a really weak year in a year where basically everybody was great in Philadelphia. So I'm not certain that he's going to be a good player for them. And really at that point, you're talking like 4 guys out of 11 on defense you can feel good about. That's not great. That's really problematic. And I think they're going to have I would feel pretty confident saying they're going to have a bottom 10 defense, even with Patrick Graham being a really good defensive coordinator. I just don't feel confident in this defense one bit. Those are my thoughts on the Raiders. Be sure to let me know what yours are in the comment section. And also be sure to like and subscribe for more NFL and NBA content.